An audio engineer's job is to set up mics properly. It's to mic the drums, mic the guitar amps. It's to get the right signal chain going to achieve a sound they want. That could be patching in a compressor, patching in two compressors, patching in an EQ, a different EQ, EQing the actual source, getting things in phase. This is all engineering duties. That's what that is, an audio engineer's duties, right? That's not the same thing as a producer. A producer, and I'm talking traditional sense of the word producer, not the word producer as it was later adopted into, you basically give a title for a beat maker to be now called a producer. That's not really what I'm referring to when I say producer. Producer, the way I refer to it, is like Brendan O'Brien. It's like Rick Rubin. It's Andrew Sheps, Joe Barresi. It's the guys that are, Sylvia Massey. It's the people that are in charge of making sure the band delivers the most so that they can get the song to sound the best. That's really what a producer is. They're deciding on performances. They're deciding on how should something be done, and maybe giving ideas like, let's record this on the roof. They're coming up with ideas, okay? And they're helping get the band to deliver the sound that both the band hears and they hear in their head. They're trying to deliver that and make it where they like it, okay? Now, that's a very different thing than working on the sonics. When I refer to sonics, I'm talking about the quality and the character of the audio that is actually coming out of the speakers and like what gear to use. This is engineering duties. So in the engineer's world, it's very, mathematical almost, where you set things up in a certain way and you patch things in a certain way. And if it's something you have too much low end, you cut low end. Like you're doing the nitty gritty as an audio engineer. Whereas as a producer, it's big picture stuff. So think big picture, even to the point of, they can sense everybody's getting hungry, so we need to order lunch. That's a producer who's going to notice that and be aware of that. The engineer is generally focused on making sure everything recorded is being recorded well and correctly and right, just to be able to get it. So when they hit the thing to play it back, it's actually something people like. It sounds good. They don't say, "Oh, that mic's been out for the last 2 hours, and why we got only one kick drum mic now? What happened?" That's an engineer's job, to be focused on that. Whereas the producer's job is to be focused on, did the drummer play correctly? Like, did they achieve what we were going for? Or is their part too busy? Or you don't understand? That's a different thing altogether. So those two jobs are their own thing. Now, a mixer can be somebody who knows how to do the audio engineering side. It can be somebody who knows how to do the producing side, but it doesn't have to be on either end. It could just be somebody who knows how to make things sound good from that end stage where they're delivered everything. They mix it and put it together, and that's what their specialty is. So in other words, a mixer doesn't even need necessarily, if they're just mixing, they don't need a studio. I mean, they need a place like a control room, but they don't need a live room. They don't need a vocal booth. They don't need, isolation rooms. They don't need to own, a bunch of vintage mics. They don't need to own these things if they're just mixers. If they're doing mixing, but they're also recording bands, acting as a producer or an engineer, then they would need to be in possession of some stuff to be able to do stuff, or they got to rent space that does have it. Either way, but the point is, it's not necessarily a thing where every mixer knows how to set up mics and how to get sounds great on the way in. It's not necessarily the case. And it's like, let's take Rick Rubin, for example. That's a great example of somebody who's a producer, but they don't play any instruments. I don't believe that he knows how to set mics up and knows which mics to use for which situation. And all he is basically a great listener who can understand his own opinion, his own perspective, and he understands, and that just happens to translate to what the public loves. So that's a very different thing. It's a very different thing to be somebody who is basically a professional listener. And they can say, no, that doesn't actually achieve what we want. We need to do that again, and this time simplify. Or like, that's what Rick Rubin is, his specialty. It's actually listening for the first time every time. That's his specialty. What Rick Rubin's not going to do is notice that the mic is on the kick drum, the kick out mic isn't working, and that should be fixed. That's the engineer's job. You understand? So Rick Rubin's not focused on that, and he's not focused on the mix. He may listen to the mix mix after it's done, because he's the producer and he needs to basically control. He needs to know that it sounds the way he wants it to sound after it's mixed, just like when it's being recorded. Like when it's done being recorded, he'll listen and decide if it's achieved what he wants it to achieve. And it's the same thing after the mix. He's going to make sure it achieved what he wanted it to achieve. But the point is, he's not the guy that's getting it there on the mixing end, and he's not the guy that's getting it there on the audio engineering end. He's a unique case in this way. Because he also doesn't play instruments a lot. And I believe Rick Rubin does play guitar a little bit, actually, but he doesn't fancy himself a musician, okay? Whereas there's a lot of people who are producers who are also musicians. They play multiple instruments, multi-instrumentalists, like we're talking bass, drums, violin, keyboards, could be anything, right? But the point is, generally a producer will play a bunch of instruments, and that could be it. Like maybe they do that and they produce, but they don't know how to audio engineer. That's a very common thing also, okay? Because the higher up you go, especially, a producer doesn't need to engineer. There's always going to be room in the budget to hire an engineer to come handle that, and that's preferable to most producers, even people like Brendan O'Brien, who know how to do everything. And this is why I put him on such a high pedestal, because the guy knows how to audio engineer. That's how he started. He then became a producer, and Nick DiDia wound up engineering most of those records from the 90s that are so amazing that we know and love. Like, I've mentioned this before, but let me just flip to it real quick. This is what Nick DiDia engineered, because somebody asked me recently, they say, so Brendan O'Brien's responsible for all those amazing sounds? And I had to say, well, hang on. It's not only him, it's also the fact that he had an engineer that was amazing, that was getting these sounds that were amazing. And it's also the fact that, you know, he mixed most of them, Brendan O'Brien, right? But a couple he didn't. Like Andy Wallace mixed the Rage Against the Machine album with Bulls on Parade on it. And so, like, there's some stuff here that was Brendan O'Brien mixing, and that album with Bulls on Parade on it, he didn't mix. So, you know, and Andy Wallace did a fantastic job. But my point is, it's important to understand who's doing what, so you can give credit where credit is due. And Nick DiDia, like Bulls on Parade, Rage Against the Machine, this is what Nick DiDia engineered for Brendan O'Brien. Better Man, Pearl Jam, Drops of Jupiter, Train, Testify, Rage Against the Machine, Wicked Garden by Stone Temple Pilots. The entire core album by Stone Temple Pilots was engineered by Nick DiDia and produced by Brendan O'Brien. All right, but also my other Stone Temple Pilots favorite album, the what do you call it? Purple, but Tidy Music, Songs from the Vatican Gift Shop, that's probably one of my favorite STP albums, honestly. I love that album. And that's Nick DiDia's engineering and Brendan O'Brien's producing. So there's there's magic here, okay? And this list goes on and on and on with stuff that's amazing. So it's just important to note who did what, and to be able to give the flowers in the right place to the people who, you know, deserve the flowers. And the bottom line is, a producer is not as good without a great engineer that he knows and trusts, that could be able to get things to happen and doesn't mess up. All right. But a great producer, he can also know how to engineer, but that doesn't mean he wants to. You keep this in mind also. In other words, if you can, it's way better if you're going to be a producer to focus on the performances and have somebody else do the engineering. With budgets today, that's not always possible. It's really rarely possible that people are willing to pay enough where you can afford to pay the engineer and also get paid enough yourself to produce it, and you're working with an indie artist. It's very, very rare. So just keep this stuff in mind, that this stuff still exists. It's just not the norm. It's the small percentage of artists out there that can afford this. And usually it's because they have a track record of being historically great artists. So if they're new artists, it's very rare they're going to be able to afford this kind of thing. But the point is, these roles that I've just described about focused on performances as a producer and audio engineering, a beat maker now, let's talk about that. That's the person who makes the instrumental track. Now, it doesn't help at all that the term producer is the same for a beat maker as it is for a guy like a Brendan O'Brien or a Joe Barresi or an Andrew Sheps or anybody who's going to produce an album. That's not the same as being a guy who produces, you know, who creates the instrumental track. The traditional sense, a producer is totally different than a guy who makes beats. That's not the same thing. But in today's world, the terms are the same. So we all just have to come to grips with that. Okay. Now, understanding that, when you make an instrumental track for an artist to come and sing on top of, you are at that point, if you are producing, a lot of producers in that sense, the beat making sense, are guys who play multiple instruments because they have to be able to record the different stuff, but they might not be people who know how to use real mics. They could be doing it all through MIDI. They could be possibly doing everything in the computer, creating the track within a DAW, and never having used a mic or a piece of outboard gear or an EQ out, unless it's an EQ inside the box. But my point is, there's like different things here that can apply, and not all the same is for everybody. There's not one path that will get you to where you need to go. Even like learn this, and then you'll get there. Don't look at anyone else's path and decide that you need to take that path in order to succeed. You need to find your own path, because just as Rick Rubin carved a lane for himself, you can easily carve a lane for yourself, or not easily, but you can carve a lane if you know what you're good at and you stick with what you're good at, and you only really expand into the areas you want to expand into. In other words, if you've got no interest in learning how to be an audio engineer, then don't learn about being an audio engineer. It's not like you need that to get to the next level. It's just, it could help sometimes, but if you're not going to devote the time and don't care enough about that, or don't want to learn about that, then you don't need to. That's what I'm saying, is it's all very dependent on what you want, and where you put your time is all you have, because we only have a limited amount of time here. And as soon as we get really good at something, look back at all the hours you spent to get good at it. So you have to love it in order to spend the time to get good. If you don't love it, you will never spend the time. You'll always just be doing it also, and you won't make it a part of you. It needs to be a part of you. Like brushing your teeth when you wake up is a part of having good hygiene. You need to wake up and need to do this, and if you don't, then that's not something you should be focused on. So I wanted to just get in front of this for everybody who thinks that they need to learn all this stuff to be able to do what they want. They need to learn what they need to learn for them, whatever that is. It's not the same for everybody. So you don't need to learn how to be an audio engineer if your goal is to become somebody who's never an audio engineer. But in the case of a Brendan O'Brien, that's why I respect him so much, because of everything he knows. The guy can do it from the ground up, be the engineer, be the mixer, be the producer. He can do all three jobs and do them amazingly. So it's in this world today, that's extremely valuable. But again, if you're just somebody who makes amazing sounding tracks, like beat tracks, and artists want to come and use your beat track, they want to lease it from you, then maybe your lane has nothing to do with learning how to use mics. It just has to do with getting your stuff programmed the way you've been doing it to get people to lease it from you, and do that consistently every day, constantly, and that's a part of you. It's whatever your lane is. You decide. You make it happen by doing it consistently every day. It's a part of you. You never stop. Doesn't matter if nobody likes what you do. Doesn't matter if nobody keeps clicking the button for, the like button or subscribe button. It doesn't matter. You keep doing it consistently. It becomes a part of you, and then you will achieve what you're looking to achieve at some point. That's the way it works. You gotta forget about the people that are listening in terms of what they might like. Make it so you really like it, and then you're on that page of being true to yourself, okay? Because Rick Rubin said this many times. The audience happens to like what he likes, and that is why it works. Whereas he's never concerned with what the audience likes, because he knows the audience doesn't even know what they like. So keep this stuff in mind. This is so critical. No matter what job you're doing, you need to be able to understand the skill set required to be able to achieve the results you're looking for. And that's it. That's all you need, okay? And you need to keep doing it consistently so it's a part of you. People think there's one way to do stuff, and they think everybody does everything, until you realize who does what and how it's very different. Some producers are hands-on all day. They make sure the part is played exactly right. They never leave the room. They're there the entire step of the recording process, every step. And then some people, like a Rick Rubin, they want to hear it after it's done. There's no use for him to sit there and listen all day while you create the guitar part. He wants to hear it after it's been recorded, and then he'll listen and judge it. and tell you if it's right or if you should change something. That's very different than a Joe Barresi who's there all day when you're recording every guitar part. These things are totally different. Okay, so just keep this in mind. There's not one way to do it. All right? I want to hear whatever your ways to do it are. Throw it in the comments. My name's Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps me out. Take it easy. You guys got this.